Welcome to the Herpcore History podcast, presented to you by Little Shop of Horrors. Feel free to reach out to us on any of our social media platforms for any of your feeder needs. All right, let's go ahead and get into this episode. All right, today I'm joined by Mr. Stephen Hammack. He was nice enough to take the opportunity to chit-chat with me, and I appreciate that. How's it going?
Pretty good. I'm hanging in there.
Yes, sir. Just grinding out. Well, where'd you grow up?
I actually was born and raised in Fort Worth, Texas, and my father and my mother were both in the fine arts. My dad was a theater professor at Texas Christian University, and my mother was a librarian there at Texas Christian University. And there's myself, and I had a younger brother who was 6 years younger. He's since passed on, but I was the black sheep of the family. I was the only one really into animals. Everybody else just had their own thing going. So,
Yes, sir. And what were some of your early kind of experiences with reptiles what got you into them?
well, when I was younger, I used to have my dad. There was some creeks near us. He'd take me down to them, and I'd do the usual collecting tadpoles and whatever, and bringing them back and letting them grow into little frogs, cricket frogs and things. Then taking the frogs back to where we got the tadpoles and releasing them and stuff like that. And I remember my very first exotic way back when. There was a magazine called Boys Life magazine, and they had classifieds in the back, and you could buy reptiles out of there. So I remember buying a boa constrictor and sitting on the front steps of the house for days, and all of a sudden this blue truck showed up, gave me a little cardboard box. I was all excited, ran in the house, opened it up, and it was just a baby boa constrictor. It wasn't even in a bag. It was just in shredded newspaper in a cardboard box. And he lasted about 2 months and then died. He was not in great shape. I couldn't get him to hold a meal down or anything, so he probably got chilled during transit or something. I don't know.
Yes, yes. And do you remember when that was roughly around? I don't know. I
Oh,
missed that part.
jeez. I just turned 66. I was probably, well, maybe 9 years old or something.
Gotcha.
Long time ago. Back in the old
Uh,
days.
yes, sir. Yes, sir. That's so crazy to think about that even so early on, and
Yeah.
I've heard of that, the articles in the back of the magazines, and you get an alligator or something
Oh,
crazy
yeah.
shipped to
I
your
mean,
house.
some of the price lists you could get back then, yeah, you could get. I mean, I remember seeing some old price lists. You can get emerald tree boas for like $20, and it was just insane back then. I mean,
Yes, yeah. I think that's one of the most interesting things is getting to see some of those older price lists of animals
right?
and what they could get. You see the one with a Chinese alligator on it, and you go, what the heck, and
Yeah, yeah,
reasonably priced. And what's also interesting is how the prices, not counting inflation, have kind of stayed pretty similar on some things, and some stuff it's insane.
right, right. Yeah,
But
I remember my parents back in Fort Worth back then. There was no such thing as a covered mall. I mean, there was an outdoor mall called Seminary South Mall, and it was just had covered walkways in between the stores, but it was outdoors. It was open to the elements. And there was a big store there. I can't remember the name of that store. And in the lower level of that store, they had a huge pet section. I mean, you could buy monkeys and parrots. And when they'd go to the mall, I'd go straight to the basement of that store, and they'd come get me when they were done shopping because I'd be down there messing with the animals. It was really, really kind of crazy back then.
yes, sir. Yeah. And so, did you get into field herping early on besides getting your first boa? Was it just going in the
I
backyard and
did,
flipping
I
rocks?
did that too. Actually, one of the things I always wanted to get my hands on things. And when I was a teenager, I think I was 12 or 13, I guess, at the Fort Worth Zoo, they had what was called the Explorer Scouts. And their Explorer Scouts are a branch of the Scouts that are career oriented. There was one for the firemen, there was one for the police, and there was one at the zoo. So I joined this, and it allowed me to start volunteering at the zoo. And it was really cool because I was 13. I was behind the scenes at the reptile house, following them around and doing all kind of stuff like that. And that's how I got the need to do that. I also took some classes. There was a museum of science and history in Fort Worth that had a live animal collection, and they were mainly known for their preschool program. They had one of the best preschool programs in the state, and they kept a live animal collection to help teach the young kids about nature and wildlife and that sort of thing. And I took a bunch of classes there as well, and that got my juices going. So my parents were good. They weren't stifling me from my interests, but I definitely was doing stuff different from them. And then I slowly started collecting things and bringing them home. I caught a bull snake out west of town and brought it home. He was an escape artist, and we had a 2-story house, and he kept getting out our bedroom. My brother and my bedroom were upstairs, and he kept getting out in our upstairs bedroom, and he always would show up on top of the old TV in my dad's TV room, because back then it was the big tube TVs, and they got warm and hot, and it was a nice warm place for him to go. And
yes, sir. Yeah.
I hear my dad yelling up the stairs, "Come get your damn snake! It's out again!" It's pretty crazy.
And so, from a very early age, you were into animals, and then focused into looking at the potential for a career in animals.
Yes, I did. I took all the advanced biology and stuff like that in high school, and when I was in high school, I started working for a pet store. I was very much into tropical fish. They let me keep tropical fish. So I had a lot of fish tanks around the house. And the pet store kept getting annoyed with me because I kept going. I go in there all the time and tell them how they misidentified this and misidentified that. And finally, the owner said, "Kid, you want a job?" And I was like, "Are you serious?" So my mom started dropping me off after school there, and I ended up getting better with that, with the tropical fish. And then I stayed with that pet store for a while, and they ended up moving down the street, and I conned them in to start carrying reptiles. So I was able to turn one of the rooms, freshwater rooms, into a reptile room, and they couldn't believe how much money they were making selling reptiles after I did that for them. So, and then once I got through college, I also went to Texas Christian University. I never graduated, so let me get that straight. I'm not academically smart, but I worked with Dr. Gary Ferguson at Texas Christian University, and he is one of the nation's #1 UV specialists in the country. So
Very
I
interesting.
got to work with him, and I got to work on a lot of research projects with him. I spent 3 summers with him in the field in Kansas studying fence lizards. I mean, we go up there and collect the gravid females, bring them back to the lab in Fort Worth, let them lay their eggs. We had 7 study sites around in these open lands near Wichita, Kansas. And once the females laid their eggs, we would take them back and release them back on their deal. And we knew which eggs were there, so we knew where to release the hatchlings. So we would toe clip the lizards, which is a permanent ID, and it really doesn't harm them. And we also would paint mark them on their hip, right above at the base of their tail, so we could identify them from a distance. But of course, that sheds off, so that's why we have to capture the ones that didn't have any paint marks. And we for 3 years, we studied these animals. And it's really interesting. Those populations of fence lizards naturally produce 2 clutches of eggs in a year. The first clutch is early in the season. It's a large number of eggs, but they're small eggs. The second clutch later in the season is a smaller number of eggs, but larger eggs. And the reason for that is when the second clutch hatches, they're the same size as their siblings from before. So there's no size difference, essentially, and there's no competitive advantage, which is really neat. And I didn't know that till I started working with them.
Yes.
So we did a lot of neat stuff like that. I also got him into chameleons, and we did a lot of work when I was working at Fort Worth Zoo with panther chameleons. We did all kinds of vitamin and UV studies with them and published several papers with them. So I got to help him with that project. But even before that, my first real professional job was back at the Fort Worth Museum of Science and History. We maintained a live animal collection of all kinds of animals. I took care of coyotes, bobcats, foxes, birds of prey, venomous animals, non-venomous animals. So we had the live animal collection I took care of, and we had two types of preserved collections that I helped with. One preserved collection we would loan out to the school system in Fort Worth. Like if they're studying birds 1 week, they could come check out a box of dead birds from the area and show the students what they would look like and that sort of thing. Then we also had a research collection. We really didn't do much with that. So that job kept me pretty busy, but that got my foot in the door professionally. And that was my first, like I said, my first real professional job. And I enjoyed that a lot too, because I like working with the other animals as well. My favorite memory from the museum was a lady brought in these two little tiny bobcat kittens. I mean, their eyes weren't even open; they had to be bottle fed. And I took them home. I mean, I brought them into work, and then I'd take them home with me every night, make sure they got milk through the night and that sort of thing. The scientific name of a bobcat is Lynx rufus, and so we named one Lynx, we named one Rufus, and that turned out perfect. Rufus turned out to be a problem child, so we found a home for her when she got older, but we kept Lynx there as one of our education animals. She was like a gigantic house cat, and she loved me. Her favorite thing to do was to get out of the cage, hop on my shoulders, and then flop down with her front legs on one side and back legs on the other side of my neck, and just sit there and purr in my ear and lick my face all day. I mean, she'd do that all day if I let her. I mean, and after I left the museum, I went back about 4 years later, and she recognized me. She was scrambling to get onto my shoulders, so they let her out. She did the exact same thing again. It was really, really neat. I really thought that was cool to be able to do that.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Yeah. When these animals choose to kind of take a liking to us, and
Yeah,
yeah, it's so easy, and I think we do it very often. And I think there's definitely you have to do that. You can't anthropomorphize animals, and I think that we do that a lot in reptiles, especially new keepers coming in.
right.
And but every once in a while, you see a little thing where you go, "What I don't know. I can't necessarily explain what that was."
Yeah.
Again, a mammal compared to a reptile, not the same at all, but it is interesting nonetheless.
And I just had another thought. Even before all that, my mom was a bird rehabber with the state, and she even had the permit to keep raptors. So I got to help her raise things. Like we got a red-tailed hawk and a Swainson's hawk that both had broken wings. We had a local vet that would work on them, and then we were able to eventually release them back into the wild. Then she ended up keeping two different screech owls because they were so damaged they could not be released back to the wild. One was a gray form and one was a red form. So that was kind of cool because her favorite animal was an owl. So that was even before I got into the museums and stuff like that. So that was really cool when I was younger. So I've worked with all kinds of animals, essentially.
Yes, sir. Yeah. And so, what was some of those early? What got you into zoos? I mean, it seems like that was your
Well, I've
path you
always
were
had an
running.
interest in them. I've always, when I was a little kid, I always had them take me to the zoo all the time. I just had a fascination with animals, especially reptiles and amphibians. And like I said, my first professional job was the Museum of Science and History in Fort Worth. And while there, I got my first actual Mexico collecting permit, and that was in 1983. And I actually got a permit and went to Mexico looking for snakes. And guess who my travel partners were? Bob Clark and Steve Osborne. It was the three of us that went on that 83 trip. And then I went on another trip in 85, right before I left the museum, with Dave Blody, who's since passed, but he was the curator at Fort Worth Zoo, and David Heckert, who at the time was curator at Abilene Zoo, and a good friend of mine, Richard Brown. And we drove down there, and we took 2 vehicles, and that was a really good trip to 85. We saw all kinds of stuff down there. But I did get actual Mexico collecting permits. Now, back in those days, in the 80s, they would not mail you your permit. They wouldn't give it to you unless you showed up in their office in Mexico City, which driving in Mexico City is another story all unto itself. That's like taking your life in your own hands. So that was kind of scary. But we did get the permits and everything, and we were able to collect a bunch of stuff and bring them back. And I was very good friends with, he's a professor at University of Nuevo León in Monterrey. He has since passed as well, David Lascano. And we used to take him with us, and we'd always stop to see him before we came back to the country. We always give him animal because he built a living collection at the university there too, as well as helping them out with their preserve collection. So I've done quite a few different things like that. One of the courses I took in college was tropical biology, and we got to spend a week on Roatan Island, which is the main island off the coast of Honduras. It's one of the Bay Islands. That was a really neat trip. I really enjoyed that. There's the iguanas on Roatan Island are exquisite. They're the most vibrantly colored green iguanas I've ever seen in my life. I mean, as adults, they look like juveniles. They're bright electric green, and the males have blue and orange spines, stripes on their tail. It's just unbelievable, the stuff there. It's
Wow.
really cool.
Yeah.
So anyway, after that, I ended up going to Dallas Zoo after the museum in the reptile house there, and I worked for Jim Murphy. I don't know if you've heard of him. I think he's since retired from the National Zoo, but he was curator at Dallas Zoo for a long, long time, and he knew a ton of academic herpetologists. So there were all kinds of people coming through the herp that I got to meet and work with, and it was really cool. And also, Tracy Thompson I met through the Dallas Herpetological Society when we were both younger. So I met him, and I met a bunch of other people that way too. And then we started a herp society in Arlington, Texas, the North Texas Herp Society, and it was very successful. It was at the University of Texas at Arlington, and Dr. Campbell himself was there. And so he let us use one of the big lecture halls in the biology building to hold all our meetings. So it was really cool to be able to do that. So I've done a lot of crazy things like that. So
Yes, sir.
and then
And so,
go ahead.
well, no, so and let's hit some of those things and let's talk about that more. So, your first trip down to Mexico, what was that like? What were you seeing? I think you said the one in '83 is when you got your
83.
permit to.
Well, we were looking for a specific type of milk snake, Triangulum dixoni, which is
Okay.
found in the Halpan Valley, Jalpan. It's very misunderstood. Not many specimens. Dallas Zoo had the only live specimen that we knew of when I was working there. Before I even worked there too. So, and it was still there when I moved from the museum to go over there. They look very similar to what's called the Mexican milk snake, the annulata.
Mm-hmm.
And I even went down to Texas A&M University. They had the only preserved Dixoni in the country that I was aware of. And we looked at I think they only had like 7 or 8 specimens, and no 2 of them looked alike. They all looked different. So we didn't know what we were going to expect. We were hoping to get, a roadkill and that sort of thing. But it was an interesting trip. I mean, we got one, as we're getting into the Halpan Valley, we got only the 5th known specimen of a night snake, Hypsiglena tanzeri, that we preserved and brought back and gave it to the University of Texas at Arlington for their collection. We didn't see much stuff in 83. It was 85 when I went with the other 3 guys that we saw a ton of stuff. We saw stuff everywhere. It was
And what
really
were
interesting.
and what was some of the stuff you were seeing at that with your second
We
trip?
actually, I don't know if you're familiar with Baird's rat snakes, but there's, the
Yes,
West
sir.
Texas Baird's rat snake, and there's this other one that occurs south of the border in Mexico. And it's very
Yes, sir.
different looking than the Texas Baird's. It looks more, I say more like a suboc body shape. It's got a much longer, narrower head and a more lean body than the Texas Bears. And as adults, the body is kind of a rusty red with a totally slate gray head. Very different. And I was able to bring 3 live ones back from our '85 trip, um, 2 males and a female. And what was interesting is in the middle of this canyon south of Monterey, it's towards the city of Galeana. It's called the Iturbide, I-T-U-R, I can't remember how to spell it, Bide Canyon. It goes, it's a canyon that goes through all different ecotones. I mean, you go up to one area and you get like ferns and everything. You go to the other area and you get pine trees. So it's really interesting. And right in the middle of the canyon, there's a big turnoff with a gravel area, and there's a cliff face where they did a sculpture in there, like that carved out a sculpture there.
Yes, sir.
So since we had 2 vehicles, what we did is each vehicle gave the other vehicle like a 10-minute lead time when we were road hunting at night. Because you'd be amazed how much stuff the first vehicle didn't see that the second one does, or stuff comes out on the road. And anyway,
Yes, sir. Yeah.
myself, and I think it was Richard Brown was with me. We were sitting there at the sculpture in the gravel with the lights off, just waiting 10 minutes. We flipped the light on, and literally right in front of my car was a Baird's rat snipe. I mean, like 10 feet in front of the car. We brought back a yearling one and then 2 hatchlings, and this was the yearling one. It was a male. And then south, as we headed south towards Galeana, which is where Thayeri are mostly found, and we go south, there's a little town called Aramberry way down south. It's like a straight road through a mountain valley. The Mexican bull snakes, Depii jani, are found there. And we were there at hatching time. I mean, we brought back probably half a dozen, and probably about another 10 roadkills for the museum collection. They were everywhere. I mean,
Wow.
there was one instance where we stopped and we were like the only cars in the road. There was like a hatchling going across the road and another hatchling right behind it going across the road. It was just like unbelievable, some of the stuff we were seeing. The saddest part of all we saw is probably maybe a 2 or 3-year-old one. And a truck had just passed us, and it must have hit that snake, and it was another Depii jani, but I'd never seen one like this before. It was bright orange with black circles all the way down the back, and
Wow.
it had been hit. I wish we could have gotten that one live. That would have been a nice one to have. But anyway,
Yes, sir. Wow. Have you seen the summer and winter stuff from Vivid?
I remember him vivid at some of the Texas shows years ago that I used to go to.
Yes,
Yeah,
sir. Yeah, some of that stuff very very interesting looking with some of the variation that you get.
yeah.
Uh very very interesting snakes for sure.
There's all kinds of stuff. I mean, I love getting out and doing stuff. I just don't have much time to do anymore now. With my age, my illnesses, I just don't do much of that anymore. So
Yes, sir. Well, what were some of I mean that's an amazing trip, and were you one of the first people to bring Bairds and the John I into the United States?
I wouldn't say the first, but probably some of the early people that did that. Yeah, the other person who
Excellent.
brought the Beards in, who started the Mexican Beards in the trade, was uh, Alan Carden. He used to be the curator at the San Antonio Zoo. Then he was general curator, and I think he's now since retired from the zoo field. But he had some of those, and he was also very good friends with my friend in Monterey, David Lascano. They did a lot of work at San Antonio Zoo with Crotalus polystictus, so they go down there several times a year to do field work with polystictus, and we picked up David on the way down because it was nice to collaborate with the foreign, herpetologists and that sort of thing. So
Yes, sir. Yeah. Yeah, it's very interesting. I think that I definitely grew up hearing the stories of his passion for Mexico and working with those animals, and that because that was influences and what my mentors were keeping and going.
yeah,
Oh, I got I got this snake from the male from the San Antonio Zoo on breeder loan. That's where I got this,
Right,
these
right.
animals from, and I think that's such a cool factor to have that,
Yep.
where nowadays you don't get that anymore,
No.
but it's so. To me, it was so cool to hear that as a young kid, going, "Oh, this is from the San Antonio Zoo." Like, oh, okay, and
Yeah,
this is how
yeah.
it got here. So to hear that, it's very cool.
Yeah, there weren't a lot of zoos actually going out and doing field work back then. There were a few here and there, and it's just San Antonio definitely was one because of Alan's interested in Mexican herpetofauna and everything. They had a large Mexican collection in their back areas that they work with, so it was pretty cool. A lot of little Cisturas ravus and just little things you wouldn't think of. And that was what I liked when I worked at Dallas Zoo because Campbell and Bill Lamar was his master's student at the time, and they went down to Mexico all the time, and they were the experts on neotropical herpetofauna. And when they would come back from a trip, they would always stop by at Dallas Zoo and tell us their stories, and sometimes leave animals for us on breeding loan to the zoo. So that was really awesome. We got to work with some really cool stuff. So
Yes, sir. Yeah.
that's why I've been fortunate. The zoos I worked with, Dallas, Fort Worth. I've spent 23 years at Fort Worth before I moved to St. Louis, and I did almost 11 years at St. Louis. And before that, I was like 5 years at Dallas Zoo. I just saw so much stuff you wouldn't believe. Some of the most, I mean, I never thought I'd be able to work with Komodo dragons. I got to raise Komodo dragons from little hatchlings in the zoo field. And that was one of the things that hurt me the most when I left Fort Worth was I raised this one male dragon, Dante, and he literally was like a puppy dog. I mean, I could go in there to every time I went in to clean his reserve area, he wanted to come over and sit in my lap. If I sat on the log in his enclosure, he literally would crawl into my lap, put his head on my shoulder, and go to sleep. I mean, this is like a 200-pound lizard. It's just unbelievable the stuff I got to do.
Yes, sir. Yeah. And so, what was kind of also to kind of get back to more field herping and that? Did you? I assume you went out to West Texas.
I
What was
did. I
your
used to
field
go to
herping?
West Texas. I didn't go as much as I wanted to because at the time all this was going on, I also maintained a fairly large collection at home. So I didn't have a lot of free time to go out and do stuff as much as I wanted to. So it kept me busy.
Yes, sir.
Didn't get much sleep, but I had fun doing it at the time. So
Yes, sir. And so, what when the trips you did get to go out, what were they like? What did you see? What do you remember?
in West Texas, my current I'm on my second wife. I took her out. She'd never been to West Texas looking for snakes. We went out there to look for some gray bands and maybe some bear dye, and we did collect some bear dye, and we actually did collect an alterna, which is kind of cool. She'd never seen one in the wild before, and she had never been out to an area like that to see things. The sad part is, at the time, I had a Suburban, and we were the only ones driving the road this one night, and we went up to this one draw where the water, when it rained, would cross the road, and we pulled around and I tried to turn around, and literally the Suburban sunk in these giant rocks. I was stuck in the middle of
Uh,
nowhere, and I had my two kids, and then she had a son, I had a son, and then we had a son between us. So he was an infant in a car seat. I was like, I don't know what we're gonna do. It's 3 o'clock in the morning out in the middle of nowhere. I
yeah.
can't get my truck out. And this old Hispanic guy in a red pickup truck came by, saw what was going on. He had a chain in the back of his vehicle, and he pulled us out. And I was like, "Sir, can I give you some money?" He's like, "No, just don't do that ever again." I was like, "I hear you. I won't do that ever again."
What are the chances? It's so funny, right?
uh,
That's just one of the magical things about being out in the field is every once in a
the other
while.
thing in West Texas people used to do was put fake snakes out to try to get you.
Yes,
They
sir.
buy like a rubber snake at the dime store and then paint it like a gray band and stick it on a road cut. And it's
Yeah.
just like, oh. And then that snake would end up moving around West Texas for a while everybody's out there hunting. And one
Yes,
of the
sir.
things they do real nice now is they do snake days every year. It's usually in the dark of the moon, June, where they have a group of speakers come out there. This year, I think it was in Alpine, Texas. It used to be in Sanderson, and it's a neat. I've never been to that. I always wanted to go, but it was always just wrong time of the year for me to get away and that sort of thing. But
Yes, sir.
that's
Yeah.
a really neat thing. They sometimes out there when you're out in West Texas hunting, there's too many people out there hunting. So a lot of
Mm.
people have these old back roads and things they go on that they don't tell anybody else about. So.
Yeah, yeah. The whole gray band hobby is a or hobby and keeping and field herping is a weird one where it's basically secrets we all know about, but you keep it quiet and keep it to your chest,
Right,
and
right.
it's a weird one, but it's earned. I definitely feel that too. Where there's certain things where it's like, man, there were game changers in my field herping with a
Yeah,
focus on alterna, and I'm not willing to give that information up because
right.
the blood, sweat, and tears I put into that over years to go,
Yeah,
oh, this little thing works for me. And then you hear someone that's caught a million tell you opposite of what you think is right. So,
right.
at the end of the day, I don't know anything. I'll just keep throwing
Yeah,
mud at the wall. And
I caught one with my current wife, one with my ex-wife, and two or three others with some friends. That's all I've seen
I
on
mean, those are
lots
pretty
of
good numbers,
trips.
though.
Yeah, yeah. Both times with the wives, that was like the only gray band seen on either of those two times. So that was kind of cool.
It's kind of like the bird watcher effect, right? The fact that
Right.
they don't care as much. They're like, oh, hey, I think there's one of these snakes you're looking for.
Yeah.
You're like, yeah, yes,
Yeah. What's interesting is my ex-wife, her family had a lot of land north of Comstock,
Oh,
north on the Juneau Road near a town called Ozona.
yes, sir.
They had 4,000 acres up there. I didn't know they had that. They leased it for oil and gas and mineral rights and everything. And a couple times I went up there with my ex-wife, and I showed the people that lived there pictures of gray bans. They're like, "Oh yeah, they're here." I'm just like, "Holy shit!" you know,
Yeah, yeah,
they're not supposed to be this far north up here.
yeah. The blue coral snake, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
That
it's
was
pretty
neat. We
interesting.
never saw one. I only got to go to their land two or three times, but I tried, but I didn't see anything. So
Yes, yes. Well, it's so interesting. I mean, hunting a slab of land compared to hunting road cuts like we do. Um, yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm I'm gonna not tangent off onto gray band hunting here because we
yeah,
would end up in an hour long hole where I'm just talking your off about alternative. No, that is interesting though, and very cool to have those opportunities to check that. And again, very good numbers for the amount of trips you got to take,
yeah,
and come out finding five over time. That's not bad.
yeah. That wasn't too bad.
We'll
I heard
take
all
that.
kinds of stories too. One of the first guys I went with out there, he claims it was full moon. He comes over a rise and he sees a gray band down there, and he just sits there in awe. And supposedly a great horned owl swooped down and picked it off the road right in front of him. And that could be true. I don't know.
Do you
I'm just
remember that
like, oh
gentleman's
my
name by any
god,
chance?
that would just kill me if I saw something like that happen. So anyway,
Well, and that would, and that's one of that's the beauty and the lore of
yeah, he
snake
was
hunting and in particular alterna.
he was known for kind of embellishing his stories anyway. So I was just like, oh wow, that's really different.
If you don't mind sharing, what was the gentleman's name?
Ken Magnuson.
Ken Magnuson. Okay.
He was very active in the herp societies way back in the late 70s and early 80s when Texas Parks and Wildlife put all the non-game animals on the protected list, like bears and subocs and uh, Pictogaster. Alterna. I mean, you couldn't collect them unless you had a
Yes, sir.
permit, which they were not giving permits out for. So, and there was a lot of back and forth, and a lot of the herp societies, a lot of people kept doing these writing campaigns against Texas Parks and Wildlife. And after about 6 or 7 years, they finally removed those things off the list.
Yes,
But
sir.
they
Yeah.
did maintain that you could only keep so many of them. You couldn't have like a 50 gray bands selling them all over the place, whatever. So,
Yeah. Well, and that was the thing, and to like your point about bringing up Snake Days, that's what inspired Snake Days, and the persecution those guys dealt with getting that
oh yeah,
going. That was a scary time to be a field herper. Where there was real consequences to what you were doing.
yeah. And some of the things, like I told you, one of the guys I went with in 90 or 85, Richard Brown, he had some of the protected animals before they were protected. So they were grandfathered in. He was offered some Baird's rats from another person right after the law went into effect. So at the time, he lived in Waco, Texas. He sent a letter to Texas Parks and Wildlife to say, hey, can I go ahead and get these added to my permit? And he never heard anything. And he was getting ready to get married. He was getting ready to leave to go up to Wichita Falls to get married. And literally the morning he was getting ready to leave, there was a knock on his door. And it was Texas Parks and Wildlife with their guns drawn saying, we're here to see your Baird's rats. And he's like, I don't have any Baird's rats. They ended up arresting him and he missed his damn wedding.
Yeah.
It's just like they were really bad back then, Parks and Wildlife.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Yeah. And and it seems to my experiences with the Parks and Wildlife agents I've ran into out in West Texas have been pleasant and have been nice, and so and they seem to be educated on what's going on out there,
Right.
and generally it's been good conversations with good information shared back and forth, and so but yeah, I'm definitely right. I've heard all those old stories of the game warden catching you with the snake you shouldn't have
Right.
and throwing it off the side of a cliff, right?
Yeah.
Just because it's not about protecting the animal, it's just about, you
Right.
not having it.
Exactly.
And,
The one thing they don't understand is those populations on the roadways are not stable populations anyway. They're going to get hit by cars whether we pick them up or not. I mean, they're so thick out there and so diversified in their habitats, and there's so much land that we don't have access to anyway. It's not going
yes.
to hurt them to take a few here and there, off
Yeah.
the roadways. So,
Well,
so
and that's one thing that, I mean, you think about how common it is, and to think that it is an animal that has the numbers to be able to regenerate itself in an area that's so concentrated, and you're losing so many mature animals a year,
yeah,
and they're still sustainable. Now, I do think that, are they susceptible of over collection in a concentrated area? Yes, but I still think that you will see those animals, and you're going to see those animals trickle in from the areas that we don't have over time.
right,
And I think that that's one thing where, here in Texas, I think sometimes, especially as a Texas field herper, you get upset that there's so little access to land. But I would rather there be a strong population of Alterna that we as field herpers can go out and not necessarily feel morally bad about collecting an animal, because there's so many sustainable animals
right.
back where we don't have access to. If that's the trade-off, because right, like I personally, right, I'm not gonna over collect or take more than what I
Right,
should for
right.
whatever reason, or collect animals just to resell them. It's not what I do. It's not what I'm into. But there are bad eggs in every group,
Oh
unfortunately.
yeah, I know. I
But
used to know a few of them that would pick up everything that moved out there.
yeah, and that's disgusting, right?
They'd
But
pick up
and does it happen
tarantulas.
still?
They'd pick up
Yes.
sun spiders. They'd pick up, you know, anything that moved. Horned lizards,
Yes.
even though they can't even keep them alive hardly in captivity. So
Well, and it's one of those things too, again, to not judge about the time and what was going on, right? Where
right,
back then, right? You think about, you hear about the pressure of people out there and just the amount of sheer field herpers in the area. You know, when you hear about stories about people lining up
Yeah.
to shine a cut, you know, like that's something that you don't have that pressure nowadays. And so I don't know, with that mindset, what was it like? It was so different
Yeah.
that, you know, times change and those people learn.
That was nice about going down to Mexico hunting with permits because there's nobody else on the road down there.
Yes, yeah, I can only imagine.
It was like
Every
nobody. Every now and then a truck moving stuff. I don't know if it's drugs or goods, but they were hauling ass, and you had to get out of their way because they weren't going to stop. But it was really cool, some of the stuff we saw down there.
Yes, sir. Yeah. And so you said you spent some time. Well, also too, what was your collection like? What were you keeping, and what was your
Mostly,
focus?
I had at one point. I wanted to have. I had all the different Mexicana. Mex-Mex, Alterna, Greer-Eye, Thayer-Eye, all the different varieties of those. At one point, I wanted to have as many different milk snakes as I could get. So I had a bunch of those. I had a bunch of different Pituophis. I had all kinds of stuff. I had quite a few berms for an individual. I think at one, I don't know how many I had at maximum point, maybe 15 or so, 20. Excuse me. And it was, the worst part was trying to find food for those berms. You'd think in Texas it'd be easy finding enough rabbits or whatever, but I had a hell of a time finding food for those things. I'd look in the Sunday papers and find them, and then, would they be good for 2 or 3 months? And they realized I was feeding them to snakes, and all of a sudden they either didn't have them or the price went up to like $15 a rabbit.
Mm.
It was like, okay, well. So I did a lot of that, and that was right before the ball python craze started. So I
And,
remember having a few ball pythons at the time, but it wasn't like it is now or shortly thereafter. So
yes, sir. What and so what berm projects were you working on? And
I had greens, albino greens, regular albinos, had albinos. I had labyrinths, and I was only the second person in the U.S. to ever produce an albino labyrinth Burmese. I got that first year Mark Bell produced hats. He only sold one pair, and he sold them to me, and that was like way expensive. $5,000 for two normal looking baby Burmese. So I raised them up and I got them going. They were first clutch wasn't that big because the female wasn't that big. I think there were like 30 eggs, and I got down to like 5 eggs at hatching time, and one of them, sure enough, hatched out an albino labyrinth. So that was really cool. So he didn't
very cool.
cheat
Very
me on the genetics. So
yes, yeah, right. Especially then, right? You hear about
yeah,
all of the options we have for testing and
and
changing, and
right, but they didn't have any of that back then. I mean, I also was the only other person. There were 5 albino Ruthvenii, the little king snakes, milk snake looking things, hatched by,
yes, sir.
I think his name was Terry Dunham. And he sold 4 of them to Steve Osborne, and he sold the 5th one to me. I was able to talk him out of one of them. So that was most expensive single snake I ever owned. I paid $5,000 for a little albino worm about 7 inches long. So that was kind of crazy.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
And then I also did a lot of like rainbow boas and jungle carpet pythons. I did Argentine rainbow boas. I did a lot of Kenyan sand boas. I bought double het for Snow Kenyans, also for Mark Bell. And I actually produced Snow Kenyans before he did. So I was the first person to produce a Snow Kenyan sand boa. Unfortunately, it didn't live very long. It was very weak and died. But I mean, at least I was the first one to do it. So.
Very cool. Yeah, it's so funny, right? I mean, growing up, right, it was always hearing, "Oh, I'm trying to get the snow,"
Yeah.
and that was like the cream of the crop thing, where it's
Right.
like,
Right.
"Man, my chances per egg to get this, and I'm going to get it sooner or later," and that's still, My first pet snake was a snow corn snake,
Yeah,
and snow will always be very cool to me.
yeah,
You
it's
know
pretty
what a cool
crazy.
thing.
I was talking about
Yes, sir.
genetics to somebody once a long time ago. 'Cause they were, excuse me, saying they felt they got cheated by the breeder, and I, sorry, mentioned to them I bought a pair of het albino Hondurans from Brian Barchett, and I think it was the male didn't do very well and it ended up dying. He ended up sending me another one. I bred them together. I created a small clutch of eggs and I hatched out a few albinos. So I kept back a male albino to raise up as quickly as I could to breed back to his het albino mom. So, and I got rid of all my other Hondurans because I just didn't have space for a lot of bigger snakes. So anyway, I raised this albino son to his het mom. First clutch, she laid 7 eggs. Not a single albino in the clutch. Not one. I beefed her back up and bred them again, and I got a second clutch of 4 eggs. And still no albinos in the clutch. I didn't know what to think. I was like, what is happening here? The next year, I bred them together, and I think she laid 8 eggs, and there were like 5 albinos in the clutch. So it's just a matter of probability. You're not always going to be, it's not you're always going to get, a quarter albinos, a quarter hets, and half normals. That's just what the probability over long term happens to be. But the individual things you never know because each one has like a 25% probability. So,
Yes, sir.
sorry, starting to
No,
cough
all good.
tonight.
No, I think that's one of the most interesting things about whether it's field herping or anything. When you start getting to the point where you're just looking at it, it's just it's no different than in a video game where you get a chance of getting this thing, and to think about it like that.
Yeah.
It's a weird little context and a weird lens to look at it through, but that's the way
Yeah.
it works.
Yeah.
And you can be unlucky. You can go dry on that drop, and how is this happening to me?
Yeah.
Very
Yeah.
interesting. Very.
St. Louis Zoo was the last zoo I worked for. I moved here in December 2012 to work at the St. Louis Zoo. And like I said, I've been dealing with venomous snakes my whole life and working at zoos for over 40 years when you add it all up together. And at St. Louis Zoo, I got my first venomous snake bite. It was a Massasauga rattlesnake. Got my middle finger on my left hand. So now I have a short middle finger because I had to amputate the end after trying to save it. It just wouldn't heal up properly. So I finally told them to take it off. And that's something I don't want anybody to ever have to go through. That really is painful. The native North American pit vipers, right away if they inject any venom into you. And I know there's this like 10 to 20% or what they call dry bites, but I knew immediately this was not a dry bite. Luckily, it was workers' comp, and they covered it and everything. It ended up being $125,000 to get it taken care of, and half of that money, like $68,000 of that, was antivenin. They used 24 vials of crowfab on me, trying to save my finger, and it, months and months of working on it. I finally just said, you know what? Let's just take the finger off. I'm tired of dealing with this. So they were like, okay. So I have a short middle finger on my left hand.
Well, there you go. Now no one will.
And what was scary, and this is what bothered me the most, is so many of my zoo colleagues came out of the woodwork and said, "Oh, welcome to the club." I was like, "Welcome to the club? I don't want to be in this club."
Yeah.
No, I've been bitten twice. Oh, I've been bitten 4 times. I was like, Jesus, what is wrong with you guys?
Yeah. No, that's the the idea of keeping venomous, they're cool. That's awesome. Whatever you're into, I appreciate that. Do it as safely as you can. But for me personally, the juice isn't worth the squeeze.
Yeah, no, it's not.
It's a
And I got my fill of it working for the zoos, so that was
yes, sir.
what was.
Yeah, in a professional setting, I think that
Yeah.
where it's taken care of, because that's an expensive that's an expensive mistake
Yeah, it
that
was.
you can do everything you can, and then but still
I know there
there's
was
still
that
another sentient
recent
being.
thing last year where that guy got bitten by, was it a tiger snake or a taipan or something? And
Mm.
it was a big deal because some places would not offer antivenin, some would. And, it's just it turned out the guy was just a nut job. So he,
Yeah,
he was free
that's
handling it, trying to claim. And I'm just like, what are you doing?
yeah. It's right. I was definitely aware of that stuff like that. I definitely I
I
feel
mean,
like I
that makes
stick
it
my head
hard
in.
for all of us down the road.
Exactly, and
Because
that's
the
the
people that
irresponsible
make the
part of it.
laws, they have no clue. They're just like, all reptile people are nuts.
Yes, and that is very unfortunate. And I think that I'm definitely guilty of kind of just sticking my head in the sand and, and being quiet about it. But especially, in the field that we're in, uh, that potentially has effects on
It does.
my livelihood, and
Well,
so stuff like that. Whether you're out field herping or whatever you're doing, there is very rarely any reason to put your hands on the animal. I
no,
get it,
exactly. Yeah.
whatever your justification for it, you know, whatever. People are going to do what they want to do. And so for me personally, that's never something I'm trying to do.
Yeah.
I will always use a tool to move that animal
Oh,
if I
yeah.
have to,
Absolutely. Yeah.
and but in a zoo setting that doesn't apply. That's a different thing completely. But just be careful out there, because what you do makes us all
Yeah.
look bad potentially.
And there's an old ex zoo curator that, he's not in the zoo field, hasn't been in a long time, thought if he got bit by venomous snakes, his antibodies would be good to use for producing antivenin. And it's been a while. I'm not going to say his name, but he purposely had videos of himself getting bitten by things just so that show that, he could survive the bite and his antibodies are built up. And I'm just like, man, I don't know what happens to these guys, but something's wrong with their minds.
Yeah, well, again, there's always the outlier, and then there is validity to that, and then
There is some, yeah. Yeah.
that's interesting, right? And like
Like Haas
is it?
down in Florida, before he passed years ago, he supposedly survived a king cobra bite, and that's unheard of.
Yeah, I guess in my mind, I just look at it as some weird like body modification thing, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly. Yeah,
where it's just like, hey, whatever you're into, right? If it doesn't affect me, if this person dies, but people go, hey, this is what this guy was doing, that makes
yeah,
sense.
yeah,
Okay, and it doesn't affect me, then whatever you want to do, brother. However you
yeah,
want to live your life, cool. Run that experiment. But the problem is the average person doesn't know, right?
yeah, yeah.
And so to your point about the outside looking in, a garter snake is a pygmy rattlesnake to them.
Exactly.
What do they know?
Oh, my first job at the museum, there were two different times where people called in. One guy described he had like a 40-inch copperhead, which is like a record size almost. And I said, well, bring it in, because we kept venomous there. My curator used to go out and give talks about venomous snakes to school groups and stuff like that. And he did it properly and safely. But we did maintain some venomous animals for that purpose. Anyway, this guy came in with this big cardboard box. I was literally expecting, like a 3-foot long copperhead in there. And I opened it up, and it's like a foot long Texas lion snake. Doesn't even look like a copperhead. Not anywhere near 40 inches.
Yes.
And he swears that's what he saw. This is a copperhead. And I'm like, no, sir, that's not a copperhead. And I reached in and pulled it out and showed him it's a non-venomous snake. People get things in their head that they think they got that they really don't. So anyway,
Yeah, but that's the beauty and the importance of zoos, is
yes,
that they educate the public, and right, we're not going to get to everybody, some people just, right, they're not meant to be awake,
Yeah.
and it is what it is. It's unfortunate, but
Yeah,
be
we had
respectful.
one of the
Uh,
things also that we did at St. Louis Zoo, we had a whole separate staff that maintained Ozark hellbenders, which are an endangered species. And
okay.
St. Louis Zoo was very successful with that program. They've released over 10,000 back into the wild, and
Wow.
they've had second generations being produced now because the ones we release are pit tags. So if they ever find them again, or they do the state herpetologist goes out and does his surveys, he can see if it's one of ours that is now breeding and that sort of thing. They've actually had breeding now of our captive bred animals released back into the wild. So they were trying to save that species. It's a pretty amazing thing.
Yes, sir.
Um, so I've been involved in a lot of different things over the years at zoos and things.
Yes, sir.
One of the things I liked about St. Louis is we had the Hellbender Project, and then we had Armenian Viper from Armenia, where we brought animals in and reproduced them for release back out into the wild in Armenia and that sort of thing. So it was pretty cool.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Excellent.
That's
Well,
one thing I liked about Dallas zoos. They always had researchers coming through. And we were the first zoo in Dallas when I worked there to breed Bushmasters. So we did some studies with naive, freshly hatched Bushmasters on their feeding preferences. So we
uh,
did, research projects with outside researchers on stuff like that. So it was really cool.
very cool. And that was something that you did talk about earlier on, was that some of your early influences was getting to do research and understanding kind of UV light
Yeah,
and
we
how
did
that
that with
played a
panther
part.
chameleons. I got Dr. Ferguson involved in chameleons, and he was really enamored by them. So we did some. Unfortunately, I can't remember the title of the papers. We had several papers come out where we took panther chameleon eggs, hatched them, and we took the hatchlings and set them up under a multitude of different UV and vitamin A and vitamin D regimes. Some had high vitamin A, low vitamin D, no UV light. Then another group would have high vitamin A, no vitamin D, and UV light. Then we'd switch it off. They'd have some with no vitamin A, high vitamin D, and no UV. And then the opposite, low vitamin A, high vitamin D, and we just proceeded to watch them grow and their behavior and their positioning in the cage. And we also gave some of the cages the ability to get out of the UV light if they wanted to versus stay under the UV light. So we had a bunch of different controls as we were going through this. And it was pretty cool. I mean, the easiest way we found, we grew them up in critter keepers. There was nothing special about it. Nothing special about the caging at all. They all got fed the same. And for water, we had like a Dixie cup on top of each cage with a little pinhole put in the bottom. And we just
Yes,
fill
sir.
each cup up with ice cubes. And through the day, it would drip. So they got constant drip of water throughout most of the day. So we didn't have to worry about spraying them all the time and that sort of thing. And we did that experiment for a number of years. And we actually, in the lab, were able to produce, I think, up through 6 generations of panther chameleons. Because, the first year we did this and we take their babies, hold some back, do it again, then do it again, then do it again. So we go through multiple generations to see if there were any changes in it. And there were some definite problems, too much vitamin A and not enough vitamin D and this sort of thing. And he was able to document all these different problems that you can note, like eye conditions was one of the issues, and not being able to control the tongue was another one. If they had like too much vitamin A and not enough vitamin D and that sort of
Very
thing.
interesting.
With the UV differences, they could those that had the UV had the ability, if they didn't have enough of the vitamins like vitamin D, they could go sit in the UV light and get what they needed. So it was really interesting stuff.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
And there's God, I can't remember his name now. He does human vitamin D research. I cannot remember his name. Sorry. He's a doctor up in the Northeast somewhere, and he has developed little ampules, little glass things with a fluid in it that you can stick out and expose it to UV, and it'll tell you exactly how much vitamin D you would have absorbed if you were sitting there for that long. So it's
Interesting.
really interesting. And one of the other side projects I did with Dr. Ferguson, was where we went out to West Texas and studied UV requirements of wild Texas horn lizards. And that was brutal. That was hard work. So you follow the horn lizard all day long from dawn till dusk. Wherever it stops and sits, it was like a 2-person per horn lizard. If it stops and sits for a while, like 10 minutes, and then moves on, then you put an ampule out where it was, and the second person stays there for 10 minutes and picks it up. So you're like round robining, following this lizard all day long. And then he sent the ampules back to, I don't know what the results of those were in
Interesting.
the end, but it was really neat study.
Wow. How, what a dream. I think that, how cool would that be to get, right? Like, my job today is to follow this lizard around for
All
eight
day long,
hours.
from dawn till dusk. Yeah.
There you go. Hey, that's crazy. I love it. I love it. Well, that's so interesting. And so, what were some of those? I mean, especially within because you were privately keeping, you were thinking about these things and applying these lessons to your keeping. What were some other studies that you got to play a part in that really kind of maybe fundamentally changed the way you thought about keeping or reptiles in general?
Um, that's a good question. We tried something at St. Louis Zoo, which turned out to be a huge disaster. We had a large walk-in exhibit for desert lizards. We had a desert corner of the building, which was all desert, xeric species. And we had San Esteban Island chuckwallas and spiny tail iguanas in there. And there was a series of lights on the sides, in front over the glass, and then on the other side. So they spent like $10,000 to put this fancy computer system in there to control the lights as if it was like dawn till dusk. Like one side would slowly come on, and then the lights would get dimmer as they move to the center over the glass, the exhibit glass, and then they get on the other side. And that ended up being a total disaster for us. The animals never got warm enough because the lights weren't on all the time. So for light cycles, yes, but for temperature, it really was a problem. It caused health issues with the animals, so we abandoned that project. So there was things like that just didn't work.
Interesting.
Yeah, it sounded really cool at the time, but then after I started noticing all these problems with the animals, like they're not eating, they're not coming down. We also kept Gila monsters in there as well. So
Huh. Would have doing something like a ceramic light, heat emitter at that point and maintaining
well, when
what
I
would have been
left
an
the zoo,
accurate.
that's what they were thinking about doing, is installing hidden ceramic units, like in a big log, facing
Right.
away from the public, but back towards the back of the exhibit. So
Yeah. Because I think
yeah,
light cycle is definitely very important for reptiles and something
yes,
and that it, against what is natural, seems like you can get away with some species doing that. But I think it really does matter, just like it would for any creature.
yeah,
And so the idea of having that there, I think there's validity to that. But if it's a heating issue, it's like, well, okay, just get rid of the light and we'll
yeah. It
just
turned
heat
out to
it to
be
where
a
we know it
heating
needs to
issue.
be.
Yep, yep.
Interesting. Very interesting.
So you live and learn even later in the day when you think you know what you're doing. So
Right?
tried something
Always.
and it didn't work.
Yes, well, but that's how we learn, right? And so educated people
Yep.
getting to experience those things and go, okay, well, this isn't working. Let's try it this way, right? I think,
Right,
yeah,
right.
that'd be my next logical step, right? Heat emitter of some sort.
Yep, that's what
And
they were
then how
going to
does that
do,
play?
but I'm not there anymore, so I don't know if they ever did that or not. So,
Yeah, well, if someone knows, let us know. I'm interested.
yeah.
How that works out. Well, excellent. Well, what were some of those other studies? What about nutrients in animals, prey item studies, anything like that you were a part of?
Um, we didn't really do any prey item studies. Like with the chameleon, the panther chameleons, we just fed them standard European crickets from Armstrong's or whoever we got them from.
Oh,
Um, oh, I did a study on my own on, I forgot about this, on North American rat snakes, on water potential. So I had a group of black rat snakes from southern Ohio. I had a pair of Mexican bear rats. I had a pair of Mexican or Texas bear rats. I had some, uh, shoot, what do they call them? I guess Everglades rat snakes. And then I had some Texas rat snakes from zoo grounds. And I would take, I hibernate them I kept them in Dr. Ferguson's lab at the university. I would hibernate them, get them ready for the next breeding season, breed them, and I'd take their eggs and split them up into three different water potentials, which is basically the amount of water per vermiculite. Like I had a 1-to-1, which is like 300 grams of vermiculite to 300 grams by weight of water. Then I did like a 3-to-1 and whatever that ended up being. And then I did a 10-to-1, which is like 300 grams of water and like, or vermiculite by weight, and basically like a thimble full of water. And I split the clutches up into these different water potentials, each clutch. And I was able to use a temperature incubation chamber at the university to eliminate any variable in temps or humidity like that. And every week I would weigh the eggs and the container. And once the container lost 10% of its weight through evaporation through the cellophane top, then I would reset it up and I let them go to see what happened. The 10-to-1, the really dry ones, they tended to hatch earlier, about 4 or 5 days earlier. They tended to be pretty much the same size, but they all seem to be lighter in color than their siblings of the 3-to-1 and the 1-to-1. And the 1-to-1 is what we were always been told to incubate our reptile eggs. But I wanted to try this to see. And I had the most problems with the 1-to-1. I had the most full term dead or disparity in size of eggs and of hatchlings and that sort of thing. And then I kept them and grew those babies up and pushed it into a second generation to see the same thing. And I never really did anything with the data. I have tons of data sitting in my garage right now from that study. But it was pretty interesting that the drier ones tended to be hatching earlier, but lighter in color to their siblings from the wetter environments, from all the different species I use or subspecies that I use. That was kind of neat.
interesting. Yeah. You should compile that
I
into
know. I
something
keep
and
saying
share
I'm
it.
going to do that, and I
You got to
start
do
to
it.
do it, and then I'm like, God, there's like too much information here. I don't know how to start.
Well, maybe there's some way. I'm sure there's some way to digitize it and
Yeah.
make it very easy. So maybe,
So
hopefully,
that was
someone
really
reaches
cool.
out and says, "Hey, this is the way to do this." Well, that's very cool, and thank you for having the
I gave a
forethought to do that.
preliminary talk about it at the
Uh,
1991 IHS meeting in Seattle, Washington. And it got a lot of good comments from some. I don't know if you know Rick Shine. He's an academic herpetologist from Australia. He actually came up to me and says, "That is really cool. You need to keep doing this." And I'm just like, "Okay, you know."
yes. Well, it's so cool when you have those opportunities and something you're passionate about,
Yeah,
and someone you respect comes out and recognizes you,
yeah,
organically for that and says, "Hey, that's I like what you're thinking with that." And again, and that's such an interesting thing that we as hobbyist keepers should apply to what we're doing is that scientific mindset to go, let me collect data over time.
Right.
That there's so much value in that. And if we all do that and we're open with that data, who knows the correlations you find and how we move the hobby forward.
Well, part of that talk, people started adjusting their water to vermiculite ratios with gray bands. It started going a little drier, and people started
Yes.
having much better hatching rates after I presented that paper, which is
Yeah.
just a fact of it,
Yeah. Well, but it's so interesting how you can get to a similar kind of, you know, kind of how I'm going to do it from field herping and how that
Right.
applies. Early on, I was told a story about, and I'm going to butcher this story, but it was a Mexicana species of some sort down in Mexico that someone I know observed a female maternally incubating
Huh.
eggs in like a what was described to me as a rock cut, if I remember
Yeah.
correctly. And so after that, when I started incubating Alterna eggs, the way I thought about it was like, okay, so this is a much drier thing. Because after I heard that story, I started sticking my hands in a lot of holes out in West Texas, which I probably shouldn't be doing. But I was
Yeah.
just sticking in there and feeling what that kind of rocky soil felt like, how moist. And
Right.
I was like, okay. And so then when I went back to incubate my Alterna eggs, I was like, let me try to mimic that. And no problems. Much drier than what
Yeah.
I had grown up knowing to do with corn snake and ball python eggs.
Right. Right.
But game changers for me.
Yeah.
Those little things that apply.
And that's what I used to tell people too, is they think of the species, think of their habitats, think of where would they lay in the wild. And,
Yes.
like you said, you saw them in a road cut way back in the back, coiled around eggs. That's not super moist. And that's, temperature wise, it's probably pretty stable, but humidity wise, it's not nearly as what we've been doing in captivity. So you adjust it and you have better success.
Yeah.
You got to think of the animal and what they would do. What would this animal do in the wild?
Well, and that's something that we don't think about. So here's something for me that took me years to find out. And like I was stood there and it dawned on me and I was like, wow, what a dumbass. I can't believe.
Yeah.
But I was brumating my Alterna in my garage. And it got really cold and I went out there and I noticed that some of the animals were in their water bowls. And I thought, wow, it's so weird. It's cold as hell out here. I would not
Huh.
want to be in the water. Why would that be happening? And so, I checked the animal, like, does that have mites, right? Like, that would be impossible. Like, I do, my whole life is avoiding snake mites.
Yeah.
And so, okay, no, the animal's fine. Okay. So, right, years later, I'm working in a tissue bank in a lab setting, and I'm looking at a refrigerator, and I noticed that the probe is in water.
Uh.
And I asked one of the engineers, I say, hey, why is the probe in water? And I say, well, because water is more stable, and we open up the door and close the door here. And so if it was in the open air, the temperature change would be too drastic, and it's not representative of what actually is the temperature of what's in here. So we store the probe in water.
Huh.
And I'm there going, what? That's why they got in the water, because it's a
Yeah.
more stable
It's a more
temperature and they're
stable
trying to
temperature.
maintain that cool temperature. And so after that, it's like, well, I think with the way temperatures are going, at least for me locally, brumating my animals in a garage setting isn't viable anymore, and you need to do it in a controlled environment, unfortunately.
Wow. Yeah, there's still so much we don't know. That's why I love this field so much. There's still stuff any given day that's new that you can think of or think about or come up with a new idea. So it's pretty amazing. And
Yeah.
it's also amazing how resilient reptile eggs are too. People don't think that, but they're really amazing things.
Yes. Well, kind of understanding that if an egg goes bad, there was something else going wrong there. It doesn't mean that like poor husbandry won't play a factor in that. In many factors, but I just mean in the egg substrate and incubation.
Right.
But that they have ways of mechanisms of fighting off organisms and
Yeah, and
if it's
another
getting
thing that
moldy.
a lot of especially the newer captive breeders don't get is not every egg's going to survive in the wild or in captivity. You're going. I
Yeah.
mean, we're probably producing more animals in captivity that would have died in the wild, and we're passing their problems on to the next generation potentially.
Oh no, not
So,
potentially. Of course we are as a hobby.
yeah.
I mean, think about it, right? How often is it the prettiest animal out of that clutch is the most difficult,
Oh yeah.
frustrating animal to get to eat? That is the unfortunate,
Yep.
aspect of that. But it was so interesting. I was just having a discussion with a customer of mine about cutting eggs or not cutting eggs,
Yeah.
and it gets to that point about not everything is meant to survive, fortunately or
Exactly.
unfortunately. And so in captive care, we find this outlier and we nurse it to health, and we
Yeah.
anthropomorphize it and monetize it. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's just what
Right.
we do,
Yeah.
and you proliferate it. And it's interesting. We got some really cool looking snakes,
Yeah.
you know.
There's some neat
Well,
stuff out there. I mean, I still love natural forms, and I admit many years ago when I had that male albino Ruthin, I crossed him to Greeri, Mexicana, Thayeri, and Alterna. But
ugh,
I
ugh.
told people exactly what I was doing,
Yes,
and
sir.
I
Yes,
named
sir.
them Mixicanas,
Yeah.
Mix, and I told them exactly what I was doing. But so many times you can't trust people doing that. And I only did it that 1 year, and I never did it again. So, because
Well,
after
and
I
this
did it, I
is
was like, "Well, that was stupid,"
well, we live and learn, right? And this is something that I am sternly against the hybridization. Again,
Yeah,
do whatever you want. It's your animal. I completely respect that. That's cool. But the problem is when you release that animal to the public, whether it's your best friend's kid, whatever it is, that animal has a 15 to 30-year lifespan. What are the chances that that animal changes hands? And
right,
unfortunately, just to our point earlier about, the person that mistakes a lion snake for a copperhead or
right,
whatever else it is, when it's time for this person to get rid of that animal, they're going to say it was and whatever pops into their mind.
yeah,
And so then the unsuspecting, but, altruistic person goes, oh, I have a female corn snake alternate, whatever it is,
yeah.
that's that, and they breed it, and you see it all the time where people
I
ask,
know.
"What is this animal?" And
Yeah,
so again, do what you want,
I
but
see that a lot
what?
on Facebook. So I just got this,
Yes,
Leonis, and I'm like, that's not pure Leonis. That's got something else in it.
yeah, but then again, too, it's not perfect, right? Like, it's I I don't know, I can't name it necessarily, but I know
Yeah,
that's not right, and so then even our scale of being able to test what it is isn't great, and that's the concern in it, is that you don't know, right? Any albino alterna you see is a hybrid.
right.
And there's no viable, you know
I've always
it's not
wondered
a
about the albino pueblins too. Everybody swears there was an original albino pueblin, but I don't know that there ever was an albino pueblin.
yeah.
I don't
Well,
remember that.
and I think that early on, right, that hybridization was much more accepted and not thought of as a
Yeah,
big deal, and as time's gone on, we kind of understand the. Yeah, I don't know, right? I mean, why
yeah,
does it matter, right? If the majority of animals aren't going to be released into the wild,
right, right,
which as they shouldn't, I don't think you should do that for
right,
many
right.
reasons, but that's a whole nother rant for another time. But why does it matter? Probably not really. Probably really doesn't matter. And the fact that I care is silly, but
No,
but I think it does matter. And
Yeah,
so,
yeah,
it's the same as locality and everything else. When you think about actual gene flow and how that works, locality is a funny way of keeping, but I
yeah.
wouldn't change it. And I love it, you know?
Yeah, I got an interesting story on Pueblan since I mentioned it. I had two wild-caught Pueblans that Dr. Campbell himself put on loan to me. One of them was the original apricot Pueblan. He was a big male. It was a wild-caught apricot Pueblan. I bred it to
Interesting.
a wild-caught, butt ugly female that came with him, and one of my first generation from Dallas Zoo stuff, female Pueblans, thinking I would have to save back the females to breed back to the dad. But no, half the babies hatched out orange Pueblans, even better than apricots. So it's a polymorphic color variety. I mean, I'm sure people could get apricots out of normals down the road at some point. It was really cool to see that. I didn't expect that.
Interesting. Yeah. I think that's one of the most interesting things about Trans-Pecos snakes in particular is the blonde mutation, right?
Yeah,
Because if you look at a blonde compared to a normal on a limestone setting, the blonde looks so much better.
yeah,
And what I mean by that is harder to see,
yeah,
and it's great. And also, side tangent here, just something. Recently, a buddy of mine was out field herping, sent me a picture of a suboc dashing away from him, and he took it on his phone, and that dorsolateral lines that they have running down their back
yeah,
does not look like it does normally. It looks like it completely runs down that whole animal's back. And it's so interesting how, okay, and it's confusing to a predator. There was some study that I saw a while ago where they did like a lizard on a screen, and the lizards had different patterns, and some of them with like striping down their back had a better, chance of escaping a predator. And so
yeah,
to see it in motion like that, it was very interesting. Where you go, okay, I guess that's why that evolved to
yeah.
be like that.
Yeah, that's interesting
You
you say that about subocs. I had some, I had a pair of totally striped from head to tail subocs. This kid was in Comstock, caught this huge gravid female, normal pattern suboc, took her back to, I think he lived in Tyler, Texas, in East Texas. She laid 13 eggs. He hatched them, and three of them were completely striped from head to tail. No blotches in the body at all. And I
know.
was able to talk him out of a pair of them. And unfortunately, they didn't do well, and I ended up losing them. But they're photographed in that Subhawk book, the totally striped ones. So that was really
Interesting.
cool. And he had taken the female. There was two males and a female. I talked him out of a pair, and he had taken the big female back and released her in Comstock next time he went back. So
Yes, there was. I think also. Are you talking about Dusty Rhodes, the complete suboc
yes, yeah,
in that book? Yes, yeah. I think there was also animals that were produced in Europe, that were completely striped,
oh wow,
and I think more of the clutch was, and so because of that, years ago I reached out, and I apologize, I cannot remember the gentleman's name, but I reached out to him and asked him if anything ever came of that stripe project, and to the best of my knowledge, he told me that nothing did come out of it. I don't know if he talked about the viability of the animals after the fact,
yeah.
but there's just nothing that came of it. And so I wonder if it's a incubation
Yeah,
kind of
I don't know.
issue
Maybe it
there.
is. Yeah, I don't
Just
know.
not throwing shade on anybody, right? We're all learning and
Yeah,
whatever, but it's kind of interesting that I wonder why that is. I wonder if it's a cooler temperature
and
that you get that, and it
our
makes
our
for a
friend
non-viable animal.
Tracy ended up with one of the first axanthic subocs I've ever seen. It was a normal pattern, but it was gray and black. I mean, it wasn't yellow at all. That
Yes,
was
sir. Yeah.
really cool.
Yeah. I have a wild caught River Road axanthic male,
Oh wow. Okay.
and is a very very striking animal. Where,
Yeah.
so often I think that you see those kind of Sanderson, Comstock,
Yeah.
kind of that range of those animals, and you can see them out further west, Terlingua area, but a very light animal, and you go, is this axanthic? And then you see an axanthic, and you go,
Yeah,
oh no, I
yeah,
will never mistake another animal for axanthic after
right,
seeing
right.
a true axanthic alternative. Beautiful, beautiful animal.
Yeah, they're neat.
Yes, yes,
There's some
excellent.
neat
Very
stuff still out
underappreciated.
there. I wish we could add more time to go out and look at things. So
Yes, sir. And are you in where'd you say that the last zoo was you worked at?
St. Louis here in
St.
St.
Louis. Are you
Louis.
still in St. Louis currently?
I still live in St. Louis. Yes, currently.
Okay. Okay, excellent. And
Uh,
what kind of made your change to go up to St. Louis? Was it
well,
a
I knew
career
the
where you go?
curator and I knew the assistant curator. I was the assistant curator's boss at Fort Worth Zoo, and here he was my boss at St. Louis Zoo.
Excellent.
And I used to trade animals with the curator here many years ago, blood pythons and things like that. I knew both of them really well, and when they heard I was interested in getting out of Fort Worth, they were just like, "We want you," and they gave me a huge boost in salary to come up here and work. St. Louis Zoo does pay better than most zoos, I must admit.
Excellent.
So
Excellent.
um,
And
I didn't. That's the first time I'd ever lived away from the Dallas Fort Worth area, so it was kind of feel bad. I drug my family up here. Now I'm going through cancer treatments, and I'm gonna wait till after the stem cell stuff later this month, and then see how I do. And we are gonna move back to Texas. So, in fact, my wife
excellent.
and son are down there now, just visiting her mom, so that before we start my stem cell. So I'm here in the house all alone. So
Well,
just
excellent. Well, excellent. Well, and something else that that I'm curious to ask you about is kind of seeing. You said you had a few ball pythons in your collection, and I don't keep ball pythons, but it's definitely a very strong part of the market of reptiles and keeping that. What were those kind of changes that you saw in the hobby over time, and compared to when you first saw it? Where do you think we are now compared to when you first saw ball
I am
pythons?
shocked that there are so many ball python morphs out there, and I'm shocked that they're still being read, and I'm shocked that they're still selling. I don't get it, to be honest with you. I really don't. Back then, when it first started, I knew people that were getting second mortgages on their homes to buy into ball pythons. And I'm just like, what is wrong with these people? I'll tell you, the only investment I ever made in reptiles that was successful was the first morph of leopard gecko. It's what's you probably know now as Murphy patternless leopard geckos. When they first came
Okay.
out, they called them leucistics. They really weren't leucistics because they had like a light yellowy greenish body, patternless body, and a white tail. But I bought 7 females from Mark Bell. He was marketing them for 10 grand. And they were already adult size when I got them. And they were only going to let one male go that year. But they wanted 3,500 just for a male. I'm like, I can't do that. So I took them home, the 7 females, got back. That was at one of the big shows in Florida. And they were big enough. I started breeding them to a couple of my normal males because you can incubate male leopard gecko eggs closer to 90 degrees and they hatch out quicker. And you can get a male leopard gecko up to breeding size in under a year. So I did that, created hets, and the very next year, I bred those hets back to all those 7 females. And I had a box of eggs incubating for males that I had pre-sold, like 25 eggs in the box at like $1,500 a piece. Anyway, I spent 10 grand one year. The next year I made 15 grand. And the year after that I made 13 grand just off that one type of leopard gecko.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Any other reptile I invested in, I got lucky if I broke even down the road.
Yeah, yeah. What's the joke? Is it the best way to make $100,000 is to invest X amount of dollar, right? It's like $1 million
Yeah,
or something, right?
yeah.
Yeah, no, it's very
So
interesting. What?
it's
Well,
good.
that's the beautiful part about the hobby, right? Is there's so many aspects to
Oh, I
it,
know,
and
I know.
It's so multifaceted, and it's so, really when you think about it, so open to the public, where you get to speak to someone like yourself that has so much professional experience in the hobby and just a wealth of knowledge, and then to, for myself as a hobbyist to get to speak to you and gain some of that knowledge, and there be that overlap there. How cool is
Yeah.
that? Where
Yeah,
in
I
many
felt
fields that isn't
conflicted.
there.
I felt conflicted many times, thinking, should I go into privates? All these other people are doing it and they're doing well. And with my ex-wife, I was at the point where I was getting ready to do that. We were getting ready to have me quit, and she divorced me. So I had to get rid of my whole collection. And then I ended up meeting my current wife, who turned out had been to my house with my ex-wife and bought reptiles from me before. So, and I remember as soon as I saw her, I was like, I remember you from all the reptile shows. So that worked out really well. So
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yeah, it's so interesting early on, kind of how the hobby shifted. Well, excellent. Well, you know what? I feel like we'll have to do this again in the future,
okay,
and whenever we're done here, I'm sure I know as I edit this, I'll think, man, I should have asked this, I should have
yeah,
asked that, and if you think of anything, write it down, and we'll
okay,
run this back in the future. And thank you again so much for your
sure,
time
no
tonight.
problem.
Excellent.
Let me zoom out on you here. Okay, you got a message for the time capsule?
Yeah, and it's simply this. My prediction for you is that even though you'll forget all about this in some way consciously, next summer at about this time, you'll remember to return.